an external expert at the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences. So, Michel, can you tell us where this journey was taking you?
By the way, I just gave a book here to the Fab Lab, which is about the Jesuits going to another planet. So it kind of fits. So what exactly is the question? I mean,
the
you want me to tell my story?
Where was this journey taking you? Where were you going on this journey? And a somewhat different question is, where has it got you?
Yeah, well, I was very unhappy when I was a child and when I was young. And so I was kind of revolting against society. So this is the unofficial story that you don't find in the Wikipedia page. And so I was a Trotskyist when I was young, 17 to 25. And that didn't really get me anywhere. So kind of at 25, I started a journey of self-discovery. So I did many things, spiritual stuff, psychological stuff. But by the time I was 30, 32, I thought, okay, I've done it. And then I started this career. But the important thing is I was really disappointed, that politics didn't work. But I went into business because I thought at that time, remember, this is the 80s, it was like where things seemed to happen. And in the early 80s, people were still talking about, the 3 Ps, planet, profit, people, profit, planet. There was a stakeholder governance. So for a brief time before Thatcher and Reagan, all cut it down, in the early 80s, it seemed that actually something was happening in business. So I went into business, the different things that you said. But then when I was 42, I had a really huge breakdown, basically. Too much work, no time for nothing. I will spare you the details. But that's when I decided to go back to what I think is my calling. And, it's changed the world. What can I say, I always felt I was destined to do something to change the world. And, when you take in the thing that you take out. So in other words, when you think you can't do it, right, you kind of have some kind of like unconscious depression because the thing that you really want to do, you're not doing it. The moment you take it back inside of you, you say, I'm going to go for it, whether it works or not. The kind of energy it gives you, that was P2P. So I had this kind of religious experience in a way, born again, but instead of, Jesus, I saw P2P, shimmering in the light. So it's a bit of a mystical thing too. I can't explain it, it's just what happened, right? So my question was then, how can we change the world today? What is the thing that's going to work? And it seemed to me that the socialist story, the labor story, that wasn't working anymore. But what was happening when I could see it, because I was a trend watcher professionally, was that this thing was emerging everywhere. These network forms were emerging, and we had the early signs of peer production with free software. And I thought, if we can change the mode of production, this is the key. As long as we can change the mode of production, we can't change anything. And this is the drama of socialism. That the idea was we take power and then we change. And then when they did, they basically reformed capital and labor in a state form. But it wasn't that, it was different, but not that different as you could have thought. So in my view, they were playing on the same game. But with peer production, the way I understand it, it's really a different game. So actually we can now see emerging within society a new modality. And I think this is how societies change, because with the womb of the old, something new is emerging, which solves a number of problems of the old system, actually strengthens it, right? Because it solves a number of issues. But it carries within itself a new value system that is increasingly contradictory with the old one. And I think this is what's happening today.
Now, am I correct in saying that when you talk about the mode of production, that central to your insight is that its technology is giving us a new mode of production today, and that is peer-to-peer? Can you explain for us what's new about this?
Well, it's not technology per se. It's kind of techno-social, if you like, right? So the technology itself can go in different ways. Think about the print revolution. The print revolution had huge contradictory effects. But one thing was sure, once you had print, you could not go back to pre-print. So the old mode of the Catholic Church controlling the knowledge, having a universal ideology for the whole of Europe, that just didn't work anymore because people could print Bibles, could read them, could interpret them. So even if it didn't create an utopia, what you would know at that time was that things would change. And Luther actually said, thank God for the printing press. He said it literally. Mm-hmm. So he understood that is the printing press that was key for the Reformation to to basically win. And today I think the internet is the same. It's a technology that allows every human brain to connect with every human brain or body mind, if you want to say it that way, without permission, without intermediate hierarchy, and this just changes fundamentally the playing game. That's not good English. The level playing game or whatever
the playing pitch.
Yeah.
The playing pitch.
And so that doesn't mean we can say exactly what's going to happen, but we know that everything is going to be different. And so in my work, I don't work with like simple predictions, I work with scenarios, right? And I still believe in kind of a class analysis as well. So I don't know if you ever seen my quadrant, and I basically, so it's global control versus local control of peer-to-peer technology, because that's a given, with a for-profit or a for-benefit association. So you have two modes which are called netarchical capitalism and distributed capitalism. Netarchical is Facebook, the hierarchy of the network. They enable us to do peer-to-peer relationships, but we have no control of the design. They own our data, and they take all the money, right? They control the value capture.
So that's like embedding the new technology in a capitalist structure.
Exactly. Yeah. Just as the Catholic Church, 2 centuries later would re-emerge after with the Counter-Reformation. They had adapted to the printing press, and they actually had adapted a lot of the techniques of their adversary, the Reformation.
So this is something that you use as the potential of the new technology simply to keep the old show on the road, if you like.
Yes. But in the end, it didn't work because, so imagine this. You're living in the 13th, 14th, 15th century, right? And suddenly the church started talking about purgatory. They never talked about it before. Purgatory was invented to give Christian bankers a chance not to go to hell, because you couldn't ask for interest. Was it the Templars, I think, who invented double book accounting? Then you had the printing. So all these patterns emerge in different places. And if you live at that time, you wouldn't really know what they meant, except it meant change. But 2 centuries later, all these patterns start finding each other, and they form the new logic, which eventually would be capitalism. So today we have distributed finance, we have distributed manufacturing, we have distributed knowledge, we have all these patterns emerging, and they're slowly finding each other. So if you're a young entrepreneur, you would say, well, I'm going to use open hardware because I can use all that knowledge that is already there. I don't have to reinvent everything from zero. You would say, well, the banks are not lending me money, so I'm going to do crowdfunding, right? So especially the new generations are going to use these patterns, and somehow slowly these patterns find each other and create a new logic. Now, I think there are 4 different logics, and 2 of them I think are transitory, which is the adaptation within capitalism, and 2 of them are post-transition. They are what I think will happen after capitalism.
So we've talked about one of the logics which is exemplified by a company like Facebook. It takes the new technology and it embodies it. It's a capitalist company. It has shares, it trades on the stock market, etc.
Yeah.
Now, give us some other examples of the other capitalist logic. That's the top-down version.
Right. So the second one I call distributed capitalism, because they accept peer-to-peer technology and they do not want to centrally control it. But it's still designed for profit. And a good example that everybody, maybe not here, is Bitcoin, right? So Bitcoin is a currency that is produced through software. Any computer can, in theory, produce a Bitcoin. So that looks peer-to-peer. Except that if you have 20,000 computers, you are a much bigger peer than if you're a farmer in India and you have no computer, right? And the way the currency is designed, it's more and more difficult to make it. So supply grows faster than, demand grows faster than supply. So it's designed to grow in value. So why do people use Bitcoin? Well, 90% of Bitcoins are hoarded. They're not used because people buy them because they think the value is going up forever. Well, that's clearly a for-profit design. That's not an egalitarian design. And all the facts show that the Gini coefficient, the inequality coefficient of the Bitcoin property is actually higher than sovereign money. The miners are already nearing 51%, which is the moment where you can actually control the whole network. So wherever you look in Bitcoin, even though the ideology is peer-to-peer, if you like, but it's a peer-to-peer trading ideology. It's making everybody a capitalist. That's making everything a commodity, right?
So those
then
are
you have the other side.
Those are the capitalist side.
Yeah.
But you've just said that you feel that these are going to become redundant and the non-capitalist version is going to come into the ascendant. So can you give us examples of the non-capitalist version? But then, what is it about this that's going to mean these are going to come into the ascendant?
Let me give you a few arguments why. Of course, it's not a prediction. It's kind of this is faith, right? P2P in the shimmering. So this is faith, right? But the faith is based on analysis of capitalism. Capitalism is an infinite growth system. It's physically, mathematically impossible for that kind of system to persist forever. And everything you see around you, around climate change and the sixth extinction of species and this plastic thing that is in the ocean, that is now like, I don't know, a few thousand square kilometers. All these things are showing us that we are nearing these limits, right? Then we have some interesting arguments. I'll just mention two of them, which I like. It's Immanuel Wallerstein. He's a world systems theorist. He looks at the input side of capitalism. He says, if you look at the three input elements, labor, materials and energy, and taxation, all of them are up. Of course, they go like this. They sometimes go down, but they never go down back to the level they were before. For example, from 1945 to 1970, they go up, and then Thatcher makes them go down again, but they don't go down to 1945. So that means that it's increasingly difficult to make a profit in production, and this is easily verifiable. The profit rates in production are ridiculous. It's like 2%, 3%, 4%. This is not where they're making the money, right? Rifkin brings another interesting argument in his last book called The Zero Marginal Cost Society, the Collaborative Commons and the Eclipse of Capitalism. Now, Rifkin is actually a fairly mainstream guy, but to hear him speak on Wall Street TV at prime time about the end of capitalism, that tells you something. It's like the Pope. You may or not believe him, but these are markers. These are cultural markers that even in the elite, you see that consciousness emerging that, that something is happening, right? So Rifkin looks at the output side and he looks at, take renewable energy, that's a really good example. Yes, you need a lot of investment to make it. But once you make it, the sun shines for free, the wind blows for free. So in a sense, once you have achieved that, you are no longer in a commodity sphere. You are already in a post-capitalist sphere because the renewable energy comes in for free. It's not a capitalist function anymore. So this already happened with free software, with open hardware, with open design, with music, with many things, with blogs replacing newspapers and file sharing. And he says this is now going to the physical production, to things like 3D printing, right? Once you have a 3D printing machine and you have biodegradable material and you have free designs on the internet, physical production leaves the sphere of commodity. So what I'm saying is there are really huge challenges for capitalism. And essentially it's a system that where we walk upside down, right? We think that nature is infinite, and that's false. So it's pseudo-abundance. And then everything that's immaterial that can be copied at marginal cost, we make artificially scarce, and we forbid the sharing. So it's fake scarcity and fake abundance. So all these reasons make me believe that capitalism is, like the Walking Dead. I think
So
that's
can you
why
give us some examples of these forms of production? We're now talking about production that have entered into non-capitalist social relations.
Okay, well, the most known example would be free software, right? But it's what I'm saying. It's a post-capitalist system that's still embedded in capitalism at this stage, right? So the question then becomes, can we disembed it? But the way it functions now is you have software coders in the whole world are producing code. They're using a license which makes it common. So once you produce Linux, and 75% of people are paid, 25% people are not paid. Now, why are they not paid? Because they're students, because they're unemployed, because they're motivated to solve a problem, 1,000 reasons, but they're not paid. But those that are paid also create the commons, right? So once you create Linux, you can't sell it. You can get paid for your labor, you can get paid for teaching, you can get paid for maintenance, but you cannot sell Linux. So Linux, free software, is already decommodifying this whole field of software. Every $1 million in Linux services destroys $64 million in proprietary software, right? So this is an example. This is now happening also with hardware because the designs are being shared. Now there's still a lot of issues to make it work at scale, but a good example is Arduino. Arduino is a motherboard that you put in the computer that is open source. And there's a whole ecology now around Arduino. It's a multi-billion-dollar economy. I'm not sure how much at this stage. It was like 8 billion 2-3 years ago, and it's growing exponentially. So it's probably quite a bit bigger now. So these are examples.
But there's still niche examples. There are niche examples within a capitalist economy.
Yes.
If you take most of the goods that most of us buy, processed foods, clothes, white goods, cars, these are produced as commodities and they're sold in the marketplace within capitalist relations of production. How does the peer-to-peer idea envisage that the production of these goods will enter into a decommodified form?
Well, through crisis, essentially. Like in Europe, today we can make open source cars. They're already designed. There's 26 of them. The most famous one is called WeCreate. It has a new design every week. And it takes about 8 hours to make them in a local microfab. It's a modular system.
So here in the Fab Lab,
you could make it. You could make a WeCreate car, and I think you should.
Okay.
And you could create, because this is where it becomes interesting. It's not one thing, but if you have a WeCreate, and then you create a car sharing around WeCreate, and then you do biodegradable WeCreate, and then you do a circular economy, and then you do cradle to cradle. That's when the benefits start really exploding, right? Then you're talking a quantum leap in sustainability. So not one thing, but it's the whole thing. So but the WeCreate car, why would we make a WeCreate car? Because the capitalist cars are there, they're not too expensive, they're working. Now what I would think, and this is not happening, and my bet is this will happen hopefully one day soon, is that somewhere in the south, some rich Chinese family decides, hey, all these suckers have made this car for free, and we're going to make it and sell it, right? So I'm waiting for this kind of enlightened capitalist in the south to say, why should we buy Volkswagens if we can make our own domestic industry based on open hardware? You know why it's not happening? Well, it's not happening because it doesn't make enough profit for capital. And this is where the cooperatives would come in, right? The thing is that if you don't have IP rent, the profit is very low. And you have to think about the end of the Roman Empire, right? Roman Empire, beautiful temples, beautiful roads, beautiful cities, but the slaves are hyper-exploited. Now we think of feudalism as the Dark Ages, right? But you know why that is? Because we don't see the temples, we don't see the roads, we don't see the cities. But if you're a farmer, your life is 100 times better than as being a slave, because you have your family, you have your kids, you have the church, you have 150 holidays a year, not counting the weddings and the funerals. But there's no surplus, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is the problem with open hardware, is because the profit rate goes down, capital is not interested. And therefore it doesn't scale. It stays marginal today.
But how will it be adaptable then how would it be adaptable within a cooperative economy? Cooperatives also need to make profits to pay their workers, to pay their members,
yes,
to
but
invest.
you would have a reasonable surplus for reinvestment. You wouldn't have a exploitative IP rent, which for a cooperative is okay. If you have food and shelter and a decent life, you know, you're not a shareholder, right? And it depends on crisis. Look at Spain. In Spain, the number of cooperatives is shooting up in the thousands. The number of time banks, and that's just one type of complementary currency, went up from 8 to 400 in just 2 years. Even in the US, the urban agriculture production from collectives has gone up with 45% in just 2 years. So the crisis, you know, drives these changes. And that's something that we don't have control over, but it's happening, you know.
So you believe we're in the transition towards a post-capitalist society?
Okay, to make it a bit more complicated, you know about the convertive cycles, right? So we just ended a big one in 2008. So the big question is the following. Will capitalism succeed to have one more growth wave in which it incorporates peer-to-peer and green in a new system that gives capitalism a new lease of life for another 25, 30 years? I actually think that's a good scenario. It allows peer-to-peer to grow more slowly in a more comfortable environment, you know, with things still functioning, right? But increasingly, I'm skeptical about this scenario. I don't, because it would have required fundamental reforms, like after 1929, and we didn't do them. So the prospect of a post-1873, where for 30 years you had, you know, just continuing crisis, is much more likely. So actually, I think that they will not do it. I think this is the last. And so for the next 15, 20 years, we will see increasingly, I think this is Wallerstein, he says when a system is at its end, the oscillations start becoming more extreme, right? So I think this is the future. We will have more and more crises, more, you know, ISIS and all these things. We will have more and more crises coming. But I hope not. I hope we can have, you know, a bit more buffer.
But isn't the possibility also that you will find as the crises exacerbate, as the crises get worse, that with the potential of this technology is utilized at local levels where you have strong local communities, local cooperatives, as in this Ecovillage, but in other places there'll be breakdown because they're not organized in such a way to utilize it.
Yeah. But, you know, I'm thinking of, again, the end of the Roman Empire, and the reason I mention them is because I spent 2 years in a sabbatical, and my aim was to read about phase transition, but it took me 2 years just to understand the end of Rome, so I never got to the next one. So I'm stuck with the Roman examples.
But it is very important now, I think, to study breakdowns of civilizations.
Yes.
Because
so when you see what happened, you know, after the end of the Roman Empire, is that the cities broke down. You know, they could no longer bear the complexity of cities. The surplus wasn't there, and so everybody started fleeing, right? And it's the monks, basically, who reorganized society around, you know, their schedule, their working practices, because the Roman elite didn't like work. That was for the slaves. And they created models. And these models spread all over Europe. So Cloughjordan, for me, you know, I say this as an advisor to the Pontifical Academy, is the monastery of the future, right? But today a monastery It's not just for men, and it's not hierarchical. Today a monastery is for everyone, and it's egalitarian. And it uses VSM instead of the Benedictine rules, right, John? Huh? I get paid for this. This is free advertising.
So you see the future as a network of small
that are exemplary to the
communities.
rest of the people. You know, this is like the shock doctrine from Naomi Klein, right? She explains how when a society breaks down and people are in shock, then the neoliberals are there with all their think tanks and all their templates, and people don't know what to do, and then, you know, they install their system. Now imagine the opposite, which is the system breaks down. Hey, Cloughjordan is not breaking down, right? And you have, because you're very clever and very active and forward-looking, you have rapid intervention teams that can travel in the world and can say, this is how we've done it, right? At that moment, you could see a much more rapid, non-linear change because you've done the groundwork, right?
But the move from small little pockets of communities that are able to use this new technology, the peer-to-peer type value system, the move from that to much bigger scales requires, as you have written and the P2P Foundation has written, it requires a different sort of a market, an ethical economy, a different sort of state, and an enabling and empowering partner state, and then a different sort of civil society contributing to the commons. How do we move from where we are now,
So
where we have none of these?
Okay, so we need to do two things. And the first thing is reconstructing economic and social power around the commons. Because what we've done it around labor. And everything we have today is thanks to labor. Universal suffrage, the solidarity mechanism, the welfare state, is because of the strength of labor and labor organizations. As labor is declining and disappearing, at least in the Western countries, we have no defense against a neoliberal onslaught, right? And they're totally destroying now very, very fast the welfare state. I don't know if Ireland is the best example of, but you look at the Netherlands, you look at the UK, it's incredibly fast. Everything they tried to do since the 80s and they couldn't, now, you know, we're all becoming Greece, believe me. In 10, 15 years' time, we will look at Greece as the first time they tried it, how far they could go. And so far they're winning, right? But maybe not, but so far they're winning. And so we can't reconstruct political power without having economic and social power, and that has to be based around the commons. So I think that people like Cloughjordan and others should reconstruct politics. So you should create Chamber of the Commons with all ethical enterprises in your region. So all ethical market entities, right, should get together and produce a social charter and support the politicians that support that social charter. The civic side would be assemblies of the commons. All the people protecting and creating commons in your locality should be creating an assembly of the commons. I think they should be separate, it's like church and state, but they should definitely talk to each other. You know, based on the power you have here, power of having your own livelihoods, your own economy, to be able to sustain struggles over time. Because this is the problem we have with Occupy and Indignados, is that, you know, networks can mobilize very fast. So it's not that we cannot organize, we can. We can actually organize better than them. But we can't last because we don't have food. You know, so...
We have food here.
Exactly, right?
But we don't have the power. They have the power, you see.
Okay, so the next step, economic and social power, is to recreate politics around the commons. And I think we should do this in different ways. One is bottom-up through these assemblies, right? But also top-down. It's really talking to all the parties that potentially represent the commons. So we have the digital culture expressions, the pirate parties and the platform parties, like Partido Ecce in Spain. You have the Greens, right? Digital commons, the Greens and natural commons. Then we have the new left parties. I don't know if you follow the news, but Podemos went from 0 to 8%, And now they're at 20% in the opinion polls.
Mm-hmm.
So they're going to take over PASOK. No, the PSOE.
PSOE.
Syriza is already number one party. So these are the industrial commons, if you like, right? And then we have in Denmark and other countries Alternativet, which is a radical ecological social entrepreneurial party, like eco-left social liberals. Strange birds, but they exist. This is a political and sociological majority if we achieve this. So we need to start talking to Podemos and all these other parties about the commons, because they don't know it, right? And prepare the stage for new type of progressive politics around the commons.
That's a challenge to us. Can I ask you a last question before opening it up to people? There's a presumption, it seems to me, in a lot of the discussion about the potential of contemporary technologies that they're used for benign purposes. Is not Al-Qaeda, or the newest manifestation of that trend, ISIS, not also a peer-to-peer movement?
Yes. Peer-to-peer, it's a socio-technological system that will be used by everyone. Facebook uses peer-to-peer, Al-Qaeda uses peer-to-peer, the mafia uses peer-to-peer. One more reason that we have to use peer-to-peer. Like everybody who counts had to use the printing press. And those who didn't use the printing press had no longer any influence. So, it's very related because, for example, if you look at the war in Afghanistan, right? They made a study that learning to make the IEDs went from 3 months to 3 days because of the internet, right? They download their little movies, they have everything they need. In 3 days, they can learn how to make internet explosive devices. Yeah. On the other side, the Americans have now trucks where they use Fab Labs. They're moving trucks that make spare parts for the US Army. So they're using 3D printing to make guns already.
Well, to me, the conclusion of that is that
so it's not a technology, right?
No, it's not
about technology.
It's the social structure and it's the vision.
But it's both.
It's
both.
And it's the interaction between.
The technology represents a potential.
Yeah.
And how that potential is going to materialize depends on what social forces take control of it.
Absolutely. Right. Let's open to questions from the floor.